everybody, Deb Tucker here from Studio 180 Design. Today's video, we're going to talk about how you can use my Rapid Fire Lemoyne Star ruler to make these beautiful blocks, traditional blocks that are called Blazing Lemoynes. Now, we've developed what we call a technique sheet to walk you through step by step the processes. This technique sheet was actually developed with a good friend of mine, Pam Goggins from Sager Creek Quilt Shop in Arkansas, and the technique sheet has all the step-by-step directions that we're going to cover here in the video today. But what I want to do before we get going on the how-to is I want you to take a look at what we see when we're looking at a Blazing Lemoyne block. It's an 8-pointed star diamond made with diamonds, and the diamonds, each of the star legs has 4 different diamonds in it. Inner points, outer points, and then we see a center ring of color. The nice thing about my technique sheets is that we give you a range of sizes. The technique sheet will actually take you through 10 different sizes, from a very large block that will finish to 24 inches down to and including blocks that finish to 6 inches. Basically, with the ruler, you're going to double the size of what you're working with. If you're working with the 3-inch guidelines on the tool, you'll be making 6-inch blocks. If you're working with the 12-inch guidelines, you're going to be making these great big 24-inch blocks. So now that you know kind of where we're headed, let's take a break and we'll get set up and get you started on the process. Okay, the first thing you have to decide is the size you want to work on. You go to the chart, take a look. It will tell you what you need to cut. The first thing we're going to cut are the strips that are going to be used to make the individual diamonds. We're working with the 12-inch block, so we'll be working with the 6-inch lines. And what I'm doing are cutting my strips, and I need 4 strips, 1 for each of the diamond colors. We have 2 strips that will be the center ring, 1 strip that will be the inner point, 1 strip that will be the outer point. I like to stagger the strips when I sew them, stitch them on one side. Once they're sewn, you go to the iron, and instead of pressing them one way or the other, what I want you to do is to press the seams open. It doesn't take too long to do that, but it will make a huge difference in the matching of your pieces. So you're going to piece your strips, head to your iron, press them open. Once you've done that with both of your strips, it's time to head back over to your cutting mat. Okay, gang, I've got my strips sewn, I've got them pressed, and now I'm ready to cut them into diagonal pieces. When I do this cutting, first thing I want you to note is, unlike strip piecing normally where you're putting right sides together, what you're going to do is arrange your strips on your cutting mat so that they are both wrong sides up. Now, hear that again. They're both wrong sides up, so they're not facing each other. I'm going to set this up so that as a right-hander, the strip is horizontal on the mat, so I'm going to be able to cut from left to right. Left-handers, what you will do is you'll set the strips up vertically so that you're going to then be able to cut with an easy angle. We have an illustration of that on our website, so you can take a look at that page. But once I've got my strips laying on the mat, I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle at the end. And from that, I'm going to then proceed to cut different segments. I'm going to show you how to cut that 45-degree angle. And I use this same process that I use when I do my traditional Rapid Fire Lemoyne Star, where I'm taking the ruler and I'm taking the edge of the ruler or the guideline and putting that along the line that I've sewn. I'm going to clean up that edge. Once I've got the guideline on the seam line, that's when I'm going to take an additional ruler, bump it right up against it. I'm going to re-clean this edge up to make sure I've got a 45-degree angle and clean up the edge. That's how I set up and get that 45-degree angle. And I would do that anytime I move the strips. After I've got my true 45-degree angle, the next thing that I'm going to do is cut these sections. The size of the sections that you cut are always going to be the same size as the strips that you've cut. In this instant, we cut 2-inch strips. So what I'm going to be doing are cutting 2-inch sections. To be able to do that, all I do is I've cleaned up the edge, and I'm putting my 2-inch line of a traditional ruler on that cleaned up edge and making my slice. What I have then are the pieces that I need to make an individual diamond leg. When I open that up, you can see the pieces look like this. I'm going to take those pieces and sew them together into my diamond legs. But before you do that, I want you to take note. There are lots of different ways that you can put this together. And there's only one way that is the way that I planned it. One of the ways you can sew these together looks like this. Well, the two center ring pieces are on the inside and outside point. Well, that's not what I want. One of the ways you can put it together is like this. Well, that's definitely not what I want. The way that I actually want to put this together, one this way, one this way. I want to arrange them in my head so that they look just like this. And the other thing that I'm going to do before I head to my sewing machine is I'm going to take a minute to actually mark my seam allowances right there at the seam that are already sewn. To do that, take note of what side you're going to mark. Flip your pieces over so they're on the wrong side. I've found that if I always put that center ring diamond to my left, I'm in the right position. Use Quilter's Magic Wand, which is my favorite tool for getting a nice 1/4 inch. And I like to use a Pigma pen to make the mark. And just make a small mark right across the seam so that you know where your match points are when you go to stitch these together. Once I've drawn the match points, what I want to do is pick up the two pieces, put the match points together. Once they're put together, take a pin and put a pin right through the match points. And rather than just locking that pin into place, what I actually prefer to do is to pin on either side so that I get a good match at that seam intersections. So that's my next step. I'm off to the sewing machine. I'm going to take my pieces that I have pinned together and go sew them into my diamond legs. I've finished sewing and I've got my 8 diamond legs pieced here and stitched together, matched very nicely in the middle. The one thing that I didn't talk about is when I do the pressing on these pieces, I like to press that seam open as well. It tends to make that center a very nice flat intersection. And before I go to the next step in the process, I have to do and take a minute to figure out what design I actually want to end up with. When I pulled the colors for this, I believed that I was going to set this up in this manner, where the red were going to be my inner points, the blues, turquoise were going to be my outer points, and the floral was going to be my center ring. But before I actually go to the next step, I like to decide whether I want a look that looks like that or whether I want a different kind of look. So it only takes a minute to turn them around and decide maybe I want to put the blue in the middle. And it doesn't end there, because the other design element is to alternate. One red, one blue on the inside, one red, one blue on the outside. And when I laid this out, this is actually the design that I decided that I wanted to make for my block. So now that I've done that, I've done my stitching, I've done my pressing, and I'm ready to trim the outer points of the diamond shapes that I've just made. What I see is that 4 of those outer points are red and 4 of those outer points are blue. So I'm just going to take them and stack them in like piles and get ready to trim. To trim the outer points, this is when you're going to pull out your Rapid Fire Lemoyne Star tool. What I'm doing is I'm going to be looking at the 6-inch lines. I'm making a 12-inch block, so I'm going to be working with the 6-inch lines. And I do have 6-inch guidelines on there. But I've discovered in making these things that I like to add a couple of additional lines to my ruler to give me a better end result. So what I've done with my tool is I've actually taken the tool and I've put Invisigrip on the wrong side. Invisigrip is a clear static cling plastic that you can put onto your tools. I like to put it on for the skidding, and I also like to put it on for the protecting the lines that are on the tool. But cover the back of your ruler with Invisigrip. And then with a permanent marker, my favorite is a Sharpie, and a regular ruler, come to the lines for the size you're making. I'm working with 6-inch. So what I'm going to do is lay my ruler down with my marker, mark a guideline that extends those 6-inch guidelines so that they're parallel to the angled edge of the ruler. When you see what I'm going to do next, you're going to understand why I like to do that. So I've got the lines, they're drawn on the Invisigrip that's on the wrong side of the ruler. I can then take this, use those guidelines, not just the 6-inch guidelines for the blue diamond, but I can use those extended guidelines. Let me get it lined up nice and straight. I'm going to use these. So I want to make it, I want to fuss just a little bit here. So I'm going to line up the two guidelines with the seam lines, the 6-inch and the extension, the 6-inch and the extension, and actually trim those outer points. 4 of those I would trim with the blue on the outside. 4 of them I will trim with the red on the outside. But always what I'm doing is lining up the guidelines on the ruler with the seam lines that I've sewn. The more careful you are with this step, the happier you're going to be with the end result. 4 of these are going to be cut blue trimmed down edge. 4 of them are going to be red trimmed down. The one thing that you saw me do is I'm right-handed, so you saw me pointing that toward about 2 o'clock. If you are left-handed, turn those, point them toward 10 o'clock if they were the pieces, so that you can trim out to the left and across the top. So that's the only difference between right and left-hand trimming. Once I've got those trimmed, I'm going to talk next about how you cut the squares for the back.